His breath was ragged warm against my ear as he pressed closer, the kitchen counter digging into my hips. My hands gripped the edge, fingers trembling while his calloused and unsteady held my shoulders. The air was thick with his scent, wood smoke, sweat, and my own nervous heat. His movements were urgent, almost clumsy, like he was chasing something he couldn't name, and I felt the weight of him, the desperate clutch of his hands. "Michelle," he murmured, his voice breaking, and my heart lurched, guilt flooding me, but my body leaned into his, craving the fire I'd buried for years. My breath caught, torn between shame and a need so raw it hurt, and I didn't pull away even as my mind screamed his name, Ryan, my husband's stepson. This wasn't the woman I thought I was, until I let it happen. I'm Michelle, 39, married to Greg for 7 years, living in a house that feels more like a routine than a home. Ryan, 25, is Greg's stepson from his first marriage, a quiet guy who's been in and out of our lives since I met Greg. Greg's a solid man, a contractor who works long hours, leaving me to manage the house and my part-time job at a florist shop. Our life is steady, but the spark's gone, replaced by bills and silences. Ryan started coming around more this spring after a rough breakup, crashing in our guest room. I told myself I was just being kind, letting him stay. But his eyes followed me, and I felt something I hadn't in years, a pull dangerous and wrong. What would you do if your husband's stepson touched your hand? His fingers lingering, and you didn't flinch. It started a month ago when Ryan helped me carry groceries in. His hand grazed mine, deliberate, and I froze, my pulse loud in my ears. I should have said something, set a boundary. Instead, I let the moment hang, let his gaze sear into me, and that silence was the first crack in my resolve. The night in the kitchen wasn't planned. Greg was on a job site working late, and Ryan was home, just the two of us. I was washing dishes, the house too quiet, when he came in offering to dry. We talked, laughed, and then his hand brushed my arm, his eyes locked on mine. When he leaned in, his lips firm and searching, I didn't stop him. His hands found my skin, and I let them. Let the counter hold us as we gave in, raw and reckless. When it was over, his breath still heavy, my hands shaking, I felt alive, desired, but the guilt was a blade cutting deep. I'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. I don't know how to face Greg or Ryan or the mirror, but I let it happen, let him unravel me, and now I'm someone I don't recognize. Before we begin, take a moment to like and subscribe. Try to watch the video for as long as possible. By watching the content more frequently, YouTube will recommend these stories to a wider audience, which will help the channel grow and provide you with more content to enjoy. Let's get started right away. Loneliness is a slow poison seeping into you until you don't notice how empty you've become. At 39, I'd learned to live with it, the quiet dinners, when Greg worked late, the way my reflection looked worn, the way life felt like a series of tasks. I wasn't miserable, not really. I had Greg, dependable if distant, and my job at the florist shop arranging roses for other people's moments. But there was a void, a hunger I didn't name, until Ryan started filling it, his presence, like a match in the dark. Ryan came back into our lives in April after his girlfriend left him. He'd always been around ever since Greg and I got married, Greg's stepson from his ex-wife, a kid who'd grown into a man I barely recognized. At 25, he was tall, lean, with a quiet intensity that made you notice him. He'd show up with a duffel bag crashing in our guest room, and Greg was happy to have him, always talking about family. I was too at first. Ryan was polite, helpful, fixing a leaky faucet or mowing the lawn without being asked. "You don't have to do that," I'd say, and he'd smile, a lopsided grin that made my chest tighten. I told myself it was nothing, just a young guy being kind, but I started looking forward to his visits, to the way he'd linger in the kitchen, talking about his job at the auto shop or his dreams of moving west. I was lonely, and Ryan saw me in a way Greg hadn't in years. Our marriage wasn't bad, just faded. Greg, buried in work, me buried in routine. I'd stopped expecting romance, stopped expecting to be noticed, but Ryan noticed. He'd comment on small things, the new apron I wore, the way I hummed while cooking, and his words, casual but warm, lit something in me. "You make this place feel like home, Michelle." He'd say, his eyes holding mine, and I'd feel my pulse quicken, my defenses fraying. It wasn't just his attention. It was the way he'd stand close when we talked, his arm brushing mine as he handed me a dish, the way his gaze lingered when I laughed. One evening, we were painting the guest room, Greg out on a job. Ryan dipped his brush, his shoulder grazing mine, and I felt the heat of him, the faint motor oil on his skin. "You're good at this," he said, his voice low, and I knew he wasn't talking about painting. My hands shook as I nodded, and when our eyes met, the air felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. "We should finish up," I said, stepping back, but my voice was thin, and he heard it. After that, every interaction was heavy. He'd help with chores, carrying laundry, fixing a shelf, and I'd let him even when I didn't need the help. His touches grew bolder, a hand on my arm, when he passed me a mug, a graze of his fingers when we sorted mail. I'd catch myself watching him, noticing the way his shirt clung to his back, the strength in his hands, and I'd hate myself for it. He was Greg's stepson, practically family, and I was married, a mother, a woman who knew better. But the truth was, I hadn't felt this alive in years, and Ryan was the reason. I told myself I'd keep my distance, be the adult, but every time he walked through the door, that promise cracked a little more. The house felt different with Ryan, around, like the air was thicker, every moment laced with a tension I couldn't shake. He was there more often, even when Greg was gone, showing up with excuses, a tool to borrow a question about Dylan's old stuff, but his eyes told a different story. I'd catch him watching me, his gaze lingering when I bent to tie my shoe or stirred soup on the stove. It wasn't innocent anymore. It was heavy, deliberate, and it woke something in me I'd tried to bury. I knew I should tell him to stop coming by, to keep things distant, but I didn't. I let him stay, let the spark grow, and every day felt like a step closer to a cliff. We started finding reasons to be alone. He'd offer to help with chores, cleaning the garage, planting bulbs in the garden, and I'd say yes, even when I could have managed. One afternoon we were in the garage, sorting through old boxes, the air warm with dust, and the faint oil on his skin. His arm brushed mine as we reached for the same box, and I froze, feeling the warmth of him, the pulse in my throat. "Sorry," he muttered, but he didn't move back, and his eyes locked on mine, searching like he was waiting for me to decide. My hands shook as I grabbed another box, and I mumbled, "No problem," but the air was charged, and we both felt it. He started opening up, sharing pieces of himself I hadn't expected. Over coffee in the kitchen, he told me about his mom, how she'd remarried and left him to figure things out, how he never felt like he belonged anywhere. "You get it, don't you?" he said, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "Feeling like you're just there." I nodded, my chest tight, because I did years of being Greg's wife, the reliable one, always in the background. I told him about my own dreams, the ones I'd shelved for marriage and kids, and he listened, his eyes soft but intense, like he was seeing me for the first time. It was dangerous, that kind of connection, but I couldn't pull away. The touches grew bolder. He'd pass me a dish, his fingers lingering on mine, or brush my shoulder when we stood close in the garden. Once he helped me move a table, his hand grazing my lower back, just for a second, and I felt a jolt, my breath catching. "You okay, Michelle?" he asked, his voice low, and I nodded, my face hot, because I wasn't okay. I was slipping, and I knew it. Every moment we spent together was a step towards something I couldn't undo, and the fear was as strong as the want. The almost moment came on a Tuesday evening. Greg was at a site meeting, and Ryan was over helping me hang curtains in the living room. The ladder wobbled, and he steadied it, his hands on my hips, his face close to mine. I could smell his breath, coffee mint, and see the tension in his jaw. "Michelle," he said, his voice barely a whisper, and my name sounded like a plea. His hand moved to my cheek. his thumb brushing my skin, and I leaned into it, my heart pounding before I pulled back. My breath ragged. "We can't," I said, but it sounded weak, like I was trying to convince myself. He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine, and when he left that night, the space between us felt alive, electric like a storm about to break. I lay awake after my body humming, my mind racing. I was Greg's wife, a mother, a woman who'd built a life on doing the right thing. But Ryan was under my skin in my blood, and I didn't know how to stop it. Every time I saw him, I felt the edge of that line, and I was terrified of how much I wanted to cross it. The kitchen became a battleground every moment, with Ryan a test I was failing. Greg was gone that night, working late again, and the house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every thought. Ryan was there, drying dishes I'd washed, his presence filling the room like a pulse. I could feel his eyes on me, tracking my movements as I scrubbed a pan, and the air was heavy, charged with what we hadn't said. "You don't have to stay," I said, my voice low, but I didn't mean it, and he knew it. He stepped closer, his towel still in hand, and when his arm brushed mine, the spark was immediate, undeniable. "Michelle," he said, his voice rough. "I'm trying so hard to do the right thing." My breath caught, and I wanted to tell him to leave, to stop, but my hands trembled, and I turned to face him, the counter at my back. His eyes were dark, searching, and I saw the same conflict, tearing me apart. Want, guilt, fear. "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice breaking, and he flinched like I'd struck him. "Because I can't stay away," he said, and the words hit like a wave, pulling me under. I should have pushed him away, said Greg's name, anything. But I didn't. His lips found mine, urgent tasting of salt and need. His hands slid to my shoulders, trembling but firm, and I felt the counter bite into my hips as he pressed closer. The rhythm was fast, desperate, like we were racing against the truth. My fingers clutched the edge, then his shirt, feeling the heat of his skin, the tension in his frame. His breath was ragged hot against my ear, and every movement was raw, driven by something neither of us could stop. The air was thick with his scent, wood smoke, sweat, and my own a mix of fear and want. My heart pounded, guilt screaming through me, but my body answered his craving, the release I'd locked away for years. When it was over, we stood there panting, his hands still on me, my legs shaky. I felt alive, desired, but the shame was already rising sharp and cold. I shouldn't have. He started, his voice hoarse, but I shook my head, stepping back, my hands smoothing my shirt like I could erase it. "Don't," I said, because I couldn't hear his regret, not when mine was choking me. "Just go." He nodded, grabbing his jacket, and when the door closed, I sank to the floor, my face in my hands, the scent of him still on my skin. I'd wanted it. Wanted him, and that truth was a weight I couldn't shed. I'd crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. The guilt was a shadow following me everywhere, sinking into my skin. I stood in the shower that night, water hot against my face, trying to wash away the feel of Ryan, his hands, his breath, the desperate heat of him. But it clung to me, a memory I couldn't scrub out. I kept seeing Greg's face, his tired smile when he came home, and my stomach churned. I'd betrayed him, betrayed the life we'd built for a moment of feeling wanted. But even as I hated myself, I couldn't stop the craving, the way my body still ached for Ryan's touch. It was like I'd been numb for years, and he'd shocked me awake, only to leave me with this. The next morning, Greg was in the kitchen sipping coffee, talking about a new project, and I nodded, my throat tight, afraid he'd see the truth in my eyes. Ryan didn't come by that day or the next, and I told myself it was better this way, that we'd stopped before it went further. But when he showed up a few days later, helping Greg with the truck, I felt it again, that pull, sharp and undeniable. He was careful keeping his distance, but his eyes flickered to mine, and the tension was there, a current under every word. "Thanks for letting me crash here, Michelle," he said, his voice neutral, but his gaze held a weight that made my hands shake. "We didn't talk about it, not at first, But he kept coming back, helping with chores, staying for dinner, and the air between us was alive, dangerous. One evening, Greg was in the garage, and Ryan and I were alone in the kitchen cleaning up. He passed me a plate, his fingers brushing mine, and I froze, my heart pounding. "Michelle," he whispered, his voice low. "I'm sorry, but I can't stop thinking about you." My breath hitched, and I wanted to tell him to shut up, to leave, but my body leaned toward him, traitor that it was. "Not here," I said, my voice barely audible, and he nodded, but his eyes were dark, conflicted, and I knew he felt it too. The need, the impossibility. It happened again a week later in the laundry room. Greg was out, and Ryan was helping me fold sheets, the air warm with the scent of detergent and his skin. He reached past me, his arm grazing my shoulder, and I turned his face too close. His lips found mine, urgent, and I let him press me against the dryer, let his hands slide to my waist. The rhythm was quick, desperate, my fingers clutching his shirt, feeling the heat of him. Every movement was raw, driven by a hunger we couldn't name. When it was over, we stood there panting, and the shame hit me like a slap. "This can't keep happening," I said, my voice breaking. He nodded, his eyes heavy, but we both knew it was a lie. The close call came a few days later. Greg came home early, his truck pulling in, just as Ryan and I were in the living room, too close, our voices low. I jerked back, my heart in my throat, as Greg walked in, tossing his keys on the table. "Hey, you two," he said, oblivious, and I forced a smile, my hands trembling as I grabbed a glass of water. Ryan laughed too loud and excused himself, but my pulse didn't slow until he was gone. That night, I lay awake, picturing Greg's face if he knew his hurt, his anger, the end of our life together. I wanted to end it, to tell Ryan we were done, but the thought of losing that feeling of being seen, desired, tore at me. I was trapped, caught between guilt and want, and every day felt like a fuse burning down. By the end of the week, I was unraveling, flinching at every sound, avoiding Ryan's gaze. He tried to talk to me once when Greg was in the shower, his voice low. "Michelle, we need to stop this, or figure it out." But I shook my head, my eyes burning. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice a whisper. "Someone's going to find out." And as I said it, I knew it was true. The secret was too big, too heavy, and it was only a matter of time. The truth didn't explode. It unraveled, quiet and sharp, like a thread pulled too tight. Ryan started pulling back, his visits shorter, his excuses to leave quicker. He'd show up to grab something for Greg or drop off a tool, but his eyes avoided mine, his smiles tight and forced. It should have been a relief. Every part of me knew this was the only way to stop before Greg found out, before I tore my family apart. But the distance stung, a rejection that felt personal, like I'd been a mistake he was erasing. I'd risked everything for those moments, my marriage, my self-respect, and now he was slipping away, leaving me to carry the guilt alone. I kept waiting for the hammer to fall, for Greg to notice my jumpiness, or for Ryan to slip and say something. But the house stayed calm, Greg buried in work, oblivious to the storm inside me. At dinner, he'd talk about contracts, and I'd nod, my throat tight, terrified he'd see the lie in my eyes. Ryan was there sometimes, sitting across from me, and I'd watch him, hating how normal he seemed, joking with Greg while I burned. I'd lie awake, replaying the kitchen, the laundry room, the way his hands had trembled, and the shame mixed with longing, leaving me restless, raw. Then one night it came apart. Greg was at a client dinner, and Ryan came by saying he needed to talk. I let him in, my heart pounding, the house too quiet around us. He stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, his face tense. "I'm moving out, Michelle," he said, his voice low, steady. "Got a place with a buddy in town. I can't stay here anymore." My stomach dropped, and I saw the weight in his eyes, the same guilt I carried. "It's not just about you," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm messing up everything, Greg, my mom, myself. I thought I could handle this, but I can't. I stood there, my arms crossed the air, thick with everything we weren't saying. "Why did you let it happen?" I asked, my voice sharp. And he flinched, running a hand through his hair. "Because you saw me," he said, his eyes meeting mine, raw and unguarded. "Not the screw-up step kid, not the guy who's always second best. You saw me, Michelle, and I got lost in it." He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that I felt his heat. "I'm leaving to protect you. And Greg, I don't want to be the guy who ruins this." I wanted to argue to tell him he didn't get to decide that, to admit how much I still wanted him despite the pain. But he was right. This was a fire that would consume us all. "What about me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, and it was the most selfish thing I'd said. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with regret. "You're stronger than you know," he said. And then he turned, walking out the door, clicking shut like a full stop. Ryan moved out a few days later. Greg mentioned it casually, saying Ryan needed his own space, and I nodded my chest tight like it was nothing. But it was everything. I went through the motions, work, cooking, smiling at Greg, but I was haunted. I'd see Ryan in every corner of the house, feel him in the quiet moments when I was alone. The guilt didn't fade, but neither did the memory of how alive I'd felt, how desired. It was a cruel trade one I'd made without seeing the cost. Greg noticed I was off, asking one night, "You okay, babe?" as we watched TV. I lied, said it was just work stress, but his hand lingered on mine, and I felt the weight of his trust, heavy and undeserved. Ryan stayed away, and I didn't hear from him, but the fear of discovery lingered a shadow over every day. I'd crossed a line I can't uncross. But for one night, one reckless, desperate, undeniable night, I felt like a woman again.